As the son of a wealthy noble, you've got the world at your feet. Your ambition: become the most respectable and feared knight in Europe. That shouldn't be a problem. Only a few things stand in your way: the plague, the rotten living conditions, the local wars, the botched surgeries, the violent cities, the poor hygiene, the genuine belief that vegetables were poisonous, and the never-satisfied thirst of local judges when it comes to executing people. But never say never, especially to subscribing to this channel. After all, what could go wrong? Becoming a knight isn't quite as simple as taking a stroll down to your local job centre. To even think about learning the ways of chivalry and the sword, you'll need two things: to be a man, and to come from a wealthy aristocratic family, especially one with a knighthood history. If you weren't either or both, sorry, looks like you'd have better success elsewhere. As a young male child of a wealthy family, you'll probably be sent to a neighbouring or allied castle or estate around the age of 7, but it'll be another 6 or 7 years before you pick up a real sword, so don't get too excited. First comes the hard graft: mucking out stalls, delivering messages, animal care, especially horses, learning to dress, and otherwise completing all the menial tasks that need doing. Even at this age, you have a job: the page. Finally, the day comes when your days as a page are complete. At age 14, you begin more in-depth tasks such as learning to read and write Latin and French, playing and writing music and chess, and developing good manners such as how to treat ladies and act in a courtroom. One day, your mentor hands you a sword in its sheath attached to a sword belt and tells you to put it on. The sword is smaller than those carried by the adults, but it's still monumentally heavy. You're now a squire, the assistant to a knight, and embarrassed by how heavy and strenuous the sword is for you to use. No matter, your mentor tells you, you'll be big and strong before you know it. Time passes far quicker than you realise, and the next time you check, and for concise plot reasons, you're 21 years old and receiving your knighthood. It's an exciting time. A few others kneel beside you, ready to be knighted too. Your white tunic and belt symbolise purity, while the blood-red cloak represents the blood you are now ready to spill on your master's behalf. You've spent the entire night before in prayer, and your sword has been blessed by a priest on the altar, so that's nice. That long-awaited morn, you kneel before the lord of the castle, let's call him John, and he dubs your shoulders with the flat of his sword and announces you to be a knight. Not only do you now command the respect of your fellow soldiers, but you also get a pay rise and the promise of land. Forget chivalry, it's time to make some money. To celebrate, you gulp down mead at the table. It's the first time you've been allowed to sit at the same table as John and your now fellow knights, instead of simply serving tables as a meagre squire. While all this drinking might sound like a party, mildly alcoholic beverages like mead, beer and wine are the only safe drinking liquids. Knights and medieval peoples as a whole literally drank this stuff all the time. Perhaps the era should be renamed the time of perpetual tipsiness. The fresh water? Well, that doesn't really exist. Although there's plenty of access to water, it's all polluted and full of cholera and dysentery, potentially fatal in this day and age. Alcoholic beverages deal with most of the bacteria, so they're safe to consume. Not that you know what bacteria is, of course. While at the table, you fork down as much meat as possible. Sounds great, right? Makes you big and strong? Well, sort of. Medieval people thought vegetables and fruit, especially raw, would make you sick. In fact, as a famous quote from the 1500s says, "Beware of green salads and raw fruits, for they will make your master sick." This was probably quite sensible and, surprisingly, true. Animal manure was the only fertilizer available, and everything in medieval Europe was, in general, absolutely revolting. If you didn't cook food, it probably retained all sorts of harmful and toxic stuff. And when you think about it, it's still vital to carefully wash your fruit and veg even in 2024. Once the food and drink are over, and amid much backslapping and manly words, you go out to your horse, who we'll call Valor because that's just the sort of exhilarating and pompous name you would have given him. Valor has been with you for the last 7 years, ever since he was young. In an ever-changing world filled with war, disease and death, he has been your companion all the way, despite the long face. I'm sorry. Subscribe for more terrible jokes. The afternoon sun beats down. It's time to hunt. There isn't time to organise an entire falconry operation, although that would have been fun. By now, you're an extremely accomplished rider. All knights must be proficient in guiding their steeds using only their thighs, knees and feet, allowing them to fight or joust with their hands. It's a unique skill, and a fantastic way to show off to a fair maiden of the village, and as you gallop past, your locks flowing in the wind, you shoot a sly smile in her direction. She's beautiful, and you'd love to get to know her more. Unfortunately, though, she's a commoner, so that's never gonna happen. Damn. Someone should invent a new genre and call it something like romance. Funnily enough, that's exactly what happened. The romance genre was coined and gained traction in the medieval period. That King Arthur-like genre of damsels in distress, knights in shining armour and forbidden love across class divides is something we now refer to as chivalric romance. Speaking of chivalric romance, you're bound by the code of chivalry. While most people today associate chivalry with a man behaving courteously towards a woman, that was only a tiny fraction of what it actually entailed. We think of it this way because of the surviving romantic stories. In reality, chivalry was a broader expectation, encompassing respect, honour, kindness, protection of the innocent and punishment of the wicked, and, arguably most importantly, glory in battle. The church probably put this code together because, without it, knights were basically thugs and enforcers, and everyone hated them. The chivalric code was a political move to change that. With the code on your mind, you dash away from the village and into the countryside, tying Valor to a tree and pulling the crossbow from his saddle. You've been trained to use all manner of weapons by now, especially the lance and sword, but the crossbow is a particular favourite. It takes much longer to load than a bow, but the bolt's power is unbelievable. Not long later, you return with a young deer strung across Valor. Moving slowly through the village, you catch the eyes of the same young woman you flew past a few hours ago. Being a knight is already much more challenging than you thought. John meets you as you travel back to the castle. He tells you that you should go on a crusade to try to, yet again, reclaim the Holy Land for the Catholic Church from Islamic control. He's probably just sacrificing you to gain favour with the king or the church, but it's tempting nevertheless. You're in a much better position than the average soldier, with your access to weapons and armour and almost a decade of training, which makes you far more prepared than almost everyone else. You begin to take this suggestion seriously. After all, you'd make an awful lot of money and receive even more land and titles, and you'd only be going away for 5 years or so. You go to sleep that night deep in thought. What a first day, and how convenient for the sake of a short video which I'd love for you to like. Skip forward a few years and the crusade hasn't exactly gone to plan. For a start, your company got lost and spent a year wandering around Turkey. As the medieval ages progressed, the king has realised that knights are in high demand. As a result, many of your compadres are allowed to buy their ways into their positions instead of completing lifetimes of formal training. Their skill levels don't exactly fill you with confidence. And now, having finally found the holiest of all lands, you're dying. You're lying on the battlefield just outside Jerusalem, fatally wounded by a Muslim warrior. They have strange weapons you haven't been trained against, and they know how to use them. Valor seems fine, apart from a few minor scratches, and your squire has also survived. You're pleased to see that. You pretend they'll be fine, even though retreat is forbidden and your fellow knights are now destined to lose. You choose not to think about that too much. You'd been told the so-called infidels would be easy to conquer. After all, they didn't have Christianity on their side. That doesn't really seem to be the case right now. This crusade, like most, is destined to fail. In reality, the Crusades were a tragedy. Conflicts between two mighty, religiously backed civilizations, both of which could have learned so much from the other. History didn't happen that way, so never mind, eh? You die on the battlefield in a pool of your own blood, surrounded by your fallen comrades. And that's the end of that. Despite inheriting all that wealth, land, and titles beyond your wildest dreams, you're now dead, and all those riches are worthless. Cheery. But that's what life was like for a medieval knight. So, if there's any lesson to be learnt here, it's that the best way to stay alive as a knight is to hide and behave mercilessly. In other words, just don't be a knight. In fact, just don't live in the medieval period. Anyways, bye!